kick it off. So when we spoke on the phone, I told you that I wanted to approach this kind of from unpeeling the layers, and starting inside and then, slowly getting to the outside. So where I wanted to start, was, it seemed like overnight, everyone one day had to work from home. So how did you guys adjust? How did you, most importantly, I'm really interested in how you guys kept your sense of culture, and how you still continue to keep that 6 months into this shelter in place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been a very difficult time, and especially when things are just completely just overnight. There you are. Um, so, it's obviously you have to act very quickly, and I think the first thing is communication, and I think the panel just before us, they were talking about that as well, and this frequent communication at all levels, making sure that the entire team hears it from leadership, and everyone is understanding what the path is, what the current state of the business is, and then how we can, as individual team members, how everyone can help support that. So to me, it was communication. It was also a little bit of making sure, because we are in this very difficult time frame, how can we bring a sense of levity and enjoyment? I love my job. I love marketing. It is, one of the sexier sides, I think, of the business sometimes. And it's also like, how do you bring some of that back, and how can you really keep the motivation going as so many different things are changing and the dynamics are they're moving very quickly all at the same time. So I think, communication, being empathetic about what people are going through, and then bringing a sense of levity to it.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting, when we spoke preparing for today, you mentioned that like at first there was almost over information sharing, and then you had to
Yeah.
pass as you moved on. And now I'm wondering, like now it feels like stamina is required at this point. So
Yes.
how have you adjusted more recently?
I mean, I think, at the very beginning, it was probably over communication, and that was, just getting everyone on the same page. This is what we're moving forward with. It was, daily, constant communication, regular full team meetings. Late, and then that became overwhelming, and it also became kind of counterproductive. And so then understanding that, reading the room, which is important, obviously, understanding the feedback from team members. And then lately, it's just been about like, when there's communication, it's value. And it's not just to kind of say, hey, I mean, and there are times that I definitely do that. But it's more about, here's what's value. I want to make sure that what I'm communicating is going to be is something that's top of mind. So we actually brought in, we kind of organized our internal team project management group to really get a sense of what the team members were looking for, what type of communication that they were wanting, and then also what are areas where we can bring forward visibility that they hadn't seen yet. And so it was, kind of the standard things at the beginning and just communication. Then it was really understanding what the team members needed and reacting to that. And I think the biggest takeaway and learning from me for the course of the last 6 months is that there's no playbook for this. We can't we can't go back to 2008, because there's similarities, but it's not the same. 9/11 was, very emotional and tragic, but also very different than what we're going through today. And so we have to write the playbook now. And we have to be able to adjust, and we have to adjust based on how the team is feeling, what's going on in the marketplace, and how our business is responding.
Yeah, I agree. There is no playbook, and I keep on thinking that in our lifetime we haven't experienced anything quite like this. Though there was the Great Recession and 9/11,
Yeah.
but I just saw something the other day that said, imagine if you were born in 1900. By the time you were 18, there was World War I and the flu epidemic of 1918. So it has happened, and that always gives me a little bit of comfort that we're not the first generation going through it. But I like what you said, and I've heard this a bunch lately, because I was also at a roundtable yesterday, and this thing of like really listening, like you were listening to what your team needed, instead of maybe rolling out like, okay, here's our objectives and this is how we're going to reach them. It sounds like there's a bigger communication cycle happening with a lot of different companies now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that to me was also a big moment, because I think the natural tendency at a leadership level is just communicate. It's about objectives. This becomes very business. This is also a very mental and emotional thing that every single person is going through. I talked to my team and I was like, is this too much? Do you need this? Do you need a daily communication from me? And they reached out, and their response was, no, we can't actually comprehend how hard it must be for you to come up with kind of these daily things to be communicating about. And that was a huge aha for me. And then it was, okay, completely shift. Now, what do you want to hear about? And then let's adjust. And what's the frequency? And it becomes a little bit more just being able to adapt, and move forward and listen, get feedback. And it's the test and learn mentality.
How do you make up for like the spontaneity? I think a lot of us are finding it harder and harder the longer we're not in the office together.
Yeah, because I think Zoom fatigue is real. It's incredibly real. And the spontaneity is missing, because now in order to communicate, the tendency is, okay, I'll set up a 30-minute Zoom. So what I'm trying to do, and we're in the process, we're at the beginning of kind of starting to roll this out, but adopt a much more flexible way of communicating. So phone calls, less meetings, less official meetings. I want to explore some other areas about, like, can we have, we already have actually a break, kind of a 2-hour break where it's no Zooms. And part of that is to just help with the Zoom fatigue, but also as people have more and more, more and more responsibilities with homeschooling, things like that, but also look at, is there, blocking out time to get some personal things done, or to just focus on work without meetings. So if you have to write presentations or go through emails. And so offering a much more flexible approach is how I want to move forward, at least, in the short term, and bring back that spontaneity, because it's difficult to just pick up the phone anymore and call somebody, because you're in these back-to-back meetings. And, our global headquarters are in Japan. And so there's also a night shift situation that's been going on where everyone kind of rotates into meetings that we have with Japan. And then you're missing those one-to-one phone calls. And so trying to break those spots up, being flexible with communications, being flexible with meetings, not requiring cameras to be on, walking meetings, things like that, I think is a way to bring back more spontaneity in something that, we all feel kind of constrained and locked behind our desks.
Yeah, I love those suggestions. My boss implemented a hard rule: no Zooms on Fridays. So but I love the 2-hour day break. And you mentioned, like, a lot of your team, you have people with kids who are going back to school. Yeah. So many people are distance learning now. And I know that mentorship is, one of your core values, mentoring men and women, but, also just kind of wondering what you think about all of the talk going on right now about, like, I don't know if the mom tax is the proper word for this, but the extra burden, it seems like, being placed maybe on members of your team that might be female, and how you're mentoring or supporting them through it.
Yeah, and I think part of that is listening to what the needs are. I think that and the feedback that I've received, and I think that we've received as a company, is that there's a very real fear of that, because you now have to do all of it all in the same space, and naturally attention is going to be elsewhere. And so to me, it was actually working at an individual level, and what is it that certain employees needs, and what is it that certain families need, and not trying to adopt a one size fits all. If there was a one size fits all, it's flexibility is the fact that I support the flexibility that people need to get through this. And then working on an individual level, if it's later start time so they can get the kids up and running with the computers in the morning. We do have that 2-hour break. If we need to start adjusting that to adapt, we will. And I think what I don't want is, I don't want women in particular to worry that because of all of these other pressures, and the way, this work from home and what that means, that somehow they're at a disadvantage because they also have to take care of their children. And so it's being empathetic and then working on an individual basis on what will work for them.
And I really feel like anytime I've seen a company that I've worked at behave like that, that creates more loyalty from your team and like this kind of we're in it together family approach, which I think makes people perform better. Like it makes people excel because they know that there's less stress around, oh, I have to be perfect in this exact hour, even though I'm like trying to get my kid on a Zoom with his teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was an article that I read that it talked about, how you need to recalibrate your expectations, because good enough going to have to work right now in certain cases. And so it's also just understanding that there is going to be no level of perfection, and trying to strive for that. It was already difficult. And then you throw in a global pandemic and social unrest and all of the above, and fires and murder hornets and things like that. And it just becomes so overwhelming for ourselves and for our employees. And I think it's really, what is people need? How can we address it? How can we be empathetic and flexible in how we deliver it? And the norms of what we were doing on March 1st, they don't exist anymore. And then it becomes about, how do we create this environment where people are going to be productive, but they're going to be happy and they're going to be mentally stable.
Right. And anything I've learned, like, some people have kids, some people don't have kids, people have, elderly parents or different responsibilities. It has definitely impacted everyone.
Yeah.
In one way or another. So and speaking, like, continuing on the mentorship and say, and along the lines of how it has impacted everyone. I know you do work with Adweek, the Adweek Executive Mentorship Program, which I think is awesome. And I have some friends that have been elected as mentees, and it's like such an honor to be able to get into the program. So it's great that you're one of the mentors in it. And I wondered, like, how some of the discussions have changed, maybe things that you focused on pre-pandemic, but then also how your mentorship has needed to adjust to the needs of the mentees during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've had a few mentees that have been pre-pandemic and now kind of in the middle of it. One of the bigger changes is that I've actually, I have a lot more mentees as well, as I think, people are looking for that networking. They're looking for guidance. You don't have the possibility of catching somebody in an elevator. And so I think that becomes much more important to have one-on-one discussion. So I think the volume of it has changed, and that's one that I welcome. I think probably a lot of the discussion, it seems less, where we've migrated from is it's less about very specific things about performance or intricacies about the job, and much more about kind of a bigger picture view. So it could be things about the company. It could be things about, philosophical. A lot of discussion is about, how can I advance in a world where no one physically sees me? And that's really been a focus of where I've been talking, especially the last tonight. With somebody that actually works overseas. And I think that's where the conversation is going, and how can I show myself and prove value, not just on, the actual delivery of my job, but actually in the networking piece of it while we're in this place. And then, everyone is asking for advice on balance and advice on how to handle trying to do all of this in the middle of a global pandemic. So I think so that's been where we've been focusing a lot of the discussion, kind of less about climbing the ladder a little bit, and more about, how can I survive in this moment and still kind of perform and have people visibly see me perform.
Some of that came up on the last panel too, that I heard about as well. And so okay, so that's like, you're talking about, that's really interesting about like culture and maintaining your company culture and adjusting to the needs of the moment, and also just, outside of your company with your mentees. And moving though, like, to marketing, the marketing side of it, from there's leadership and marketing. When this happened, when all this came down in March, I know you guys were in the middle of, what you thought would be launching Centra. And so I'd love to hear more about like the story about what happened, how you pivoted, and how you ultimately came out the other side.
Sure. So at the beginning of March, we were getting ready to launch the all new 2020 Centra, which is our newest sedan. We had NCAA Final Four was one of our big marketing platforms. We had great plans. We had just started the campaign. And then, kind of March, I think it was March 13th happened. And that's when everything really started. We started to go into the shelter in place restrictions. Overnight, the automotive industry dropped. Demand dropped. People were staying at home, so they're not driving cars. Dealerships were closed because they were not considered essential service. People didn't need cars. And if they did, they weren't able to go buy them, actually. And so from a marketing standpoint, trying to communicate about a brand new car, have these big plans, it wasn't right. And it would be tone deaf for us to do that. And also, and really, and importantly, there's the consumer mentality, but also the market wasn't there. It just wasn't. And even if people wanted the new Centra, they wouldn't be able to go buy it. And so we postponed all of that. Obviously, the NCAA, the tournament was canceled. But we postponed all of our other activity, and we really completely reconfigured the marketing launch activity for that. We shifted our messaging into much more about what Nissan could provide to anyone that needed a new vehicle, but most importantly, if people needed service. So if you were essential workers and you needed service, if you were looking for special pricing, if in areas where dealerships were available, there was drop off and delivery. And so it became much more about what was relevant to the consumer needs. At that, so that was in the market for a couple of months. And then as things started to open back up, we went in and kind of pressure tested is the demand coming back in the automotive sector? Dealerships are starting to open. When should we come back into market with our Centra launch? And just looking at the data and really getting into it, and we're looking at mobility data, talking with our dealerships. We began to relaunch in June, but before that, we wanted to pressure test the messaging just to make sure there wasn't anything that was, we would be blindsided by a COVID concern. And so all of that passed. We got it back into market in June, and we're in the process of, our third month of that now, closing out our third month. And it's been, and I think the biggest thing is once we actually got back into market, we reconfigured what that launch plan looks like, because consumer behavior has changed in that time. And you're seeing much more digital activity, much more shopping online. You don't have something like NCAA. So we also just looked at where were consumers, how were they consuming content, and what were they looking for from brands, and realigned our plans to that.
I think that when we spoke about it, one of the things that I found really fascinating that I hadn't thought about, even though it was actually really obvious once you said it, was that they have dealers also, right? In every different state and different county with different health measures or requirements by law. Like, that sounds really confusing so how do you support a dealer association that has such varied like rules, regulations. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a marketing subcommittee, which it comprises of dealers all across the country. So you're getting, smaller dealers, bigger dealers, all across the states. And, I've had this group for, since I started, but we collaborate with them on all of our marketing programs. And I love working with them. They're my gut check. They're the testing group when I want to pilot new things. We had a call on March 13th, right before everything went into shutdown, and talk through our plans. And at that point, kind of hear what's happening in the different regions around the country. And it became kind of universal. We needed to shift. So that was what our recommendation was. Throughout the course of it, it became about what do they need? And what are consumers saying to them as they're coming in or as they're contacting them? And one of the biggest things, especially as things started to open up, is that dealers really wanted to find a way to communicate how they were handling health and safety measures. And how do you do that? But you need to do it in a virtual way. So we worked with Facebook actually and started this Facebook live test where it's actually just individual dealers getting on Facebook Live and talking about everything that they're doing. And it became a way for them to have these one-on-one or one-to-many interactions with consumers, whether it's owners or people that are in the market looking for a new car. And it gave a way for them to start to talk about what they're doing. And that's evolved over time. There's still a lot of content about that. It's evolved into, some of the new product content. And I think that gave them a way to have this virtual connection with consumers that they were missing. And if you think about it, at first we wanted to make sure that we weren't, setting unrealistic expectations on it with them because it's a new platform, but we also realized the impact of it. And when you think about 200 people tuning into a live stream of a dealer, that's the equivalent of 200 people going into a showroom, which is rare for that to happen all at the same time. And so they really started to see that as a potential way for them to talk about what's going on, talk about, what's happening in their dealership and the products. And so that was a big thing for them. And I think go ahead.
No, yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, I, as a consumer, have seen a lot more activity on Facebook Lives and Instagram Lives from brands, and it's been really fascinating to see.
Yeah, and the other thing this was an unintended benefit, but was great to see, is that it was actually a morale tool for people inside the dealership because it allowed them to be creative. It allowed them to find a way to reach out to consumers, and that's what these guys love. And so it kind of opened up another way for them to do that. And it became, now they have competitions and the best live streams and things like that. So it became this a morale booster as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a way to connect that we don't have right now. Just yesterday, I noticed like one of my favorite high-end jewelry brands all of a sudden was doing Instagram Live, and I was really surprised about it, just because I hadn't seen that really happen. And what it almost was like a trunk show from my home, which I couldn't, go to. So it's like having like that virtual test drive or whatever. If you're in the market for a car, like this is this is how shiny it is, and look at this new color we got in, and could be pretty cool. So one thing that I definitely saw when we spoke, and I'm experiencing it, I think that everyone seems busier now than they were before the pandemic, which almost seems counterintuitive because like if you were home, cut out the commute time, cut out all the crazy travel, you would have, more opportunity for time. But the truth is you don't. And I think part of the reason is what you described. You described it as beast mode with planning, and how you plan for different scenarios and have like, it just seemed daunting to me. Why don't you explain it? Because I don't want to like explain it for you. And it's fascinating, and it sounds like it's really difficult to do.
Yeah. It was when I was calling beast mode, it was we're starting to approach things with several different scenarios, and then being able to adjust depending on what happens within the market dynamics. And I think our relationships with college sports is a perfect example of that, in college football. Basketball was canceled. Looking at the college football season, we went in and planned if the season was going to happen, if the season was going to happen without fans, and if the season didn't happen at all. And we had we had fleshed out plans based on that. We created content based on all three of those different scenarios. We had media plans against all of those. And I think the reality is that it takes a lot of effort. Once you kind of understand what the variables are, you can get through it a little bit faster. And we have, we've been able to do a couple of these, but, and an example with college football, and we have a relationship with the Heisman Trust. We had, going into the season, which started last week, you had 3 conferences. And so we had shifted our media plans to offset some of that media that was lost because of a smaller schedule. Now we have the Big Ten conferences coming back in, so that adjusts everything again. So it's kind of setting up what the skeleton is going to be, what are the different scenarios, and then being able to activate it. It's a lot of work, and we've been able to react quickly.
That's amazing. And the thing is, it's a lot of work for you, Client Direct. It's a lot of work for your agency, and it's a lot of work for your media partners, and publishers. So all across the board. And this is why we're all busier now than we were before, or one of the many reasons. So now it's time to turn to questions. Of course, I have more I could ask, but I'm going to stop being selfish. I'm going to open it up. Let's see. Well, going back to what we talked about earlier in mentorship, the question is, did you have a professional mentor early on in your career, and how did that impact your journey?
Yeah, I didn't have a professional mentor when I was starting out. What I did is I actually started to seek mentors out because there wasn't a program. There were programs in place where I was. So I was that ambitious, young professional that was, there would be people that I would notice in meetings and I was like, I want to learn from that person. And so I would approach them. And I learned a lot out of that. And so I started developing those relationships. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to have executive coaching, which was incredible. And I use all of that to date. And we'll continue with that. I would say what I've taken from that experience and applied it into how I mentor, it's actually just, to me, it's about I've learned the type of mentor that I want to be. And it's about helping to guide, being there to listen and to support with the objective to kind of help them not stumble as much as I did along the way. And so if there are these little kind of tips or things or just watch outs or, make sure you do this, things like that, and just kind of helping them along the way instead of having to figure it out and instead of them having to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do with my kids too all the time. I don't know if it's with them. Well, this is actually dovetails to another question asked. If you could give your younger self a piece of career advice, what would it be?
Stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to be perfect. I think for a very long time, I was looking for perfection. And it wasn't, I took an assignment in Japan a few years ago. And that's where I really learned that doesn't exist. And just to focus on know where I want to go or where I want a project to go or where I want to know or where, kind of either project or my career, know where I want to go and understand that the journey there can't be controlled all the time. And that's what I really, so I would say that it's, kind of focus more on the learning from the journey instead of the perfection in the end state.
It's interesting that you had that experience when you were overseas. Did it have to do anything also with cultural differences or?
I definitely think so. And I've had 2 foreign assignments, one in Europe and then one in Japan. And I think the Japan one was, very much more difficult because of the cultural differences. And, when you're in an environment where the language barrier, there is a very significant language barrier. It's a very different gender dynamics are there. There's a different relationship with cars. All of the things that that you're experts in and that you can communicate about, that becomes not just a given. And so you have to focus so much more, not about, again, like the perfection of those things, but more about how can I influence a situation and how can I do that productively and how will that evolve, throughout the course of a project, as an example.
So interesting. So let's see here. Next question. I like how these are also kind of dovetailing with like the inside to the outside. Now we're going more to the outside.
Good. The onion's perfect.
Yes. What trends in consumer behavior are of particular interest to you and marketers in general now? How are they consuming media differently? How are they interacting with brands differently? That was like 3 questions in one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a surprise. Everyone is digital. Everything is digital. It was interesting to see it, and on the media side is linear TV increased, obviously, as more people were home. That was there. But also, I just think people started to view their consumption as, kind of content versus channel by channel. So I think it was much more shifting into digital. How can brands be aligned with that? Where are the opportunities? Obviously, audio became a big play because if you're not in your car, you're not listening to your radio. So how does streaming audio come into that? How do podcasts, things like that? And so for us, I think it's about finding ways for brands to find those moments on those platforms, align the content with who the audience is, and then just make sure that your messaging is going to be relevant. But the shift to digital and online, that has happened. We are now in the next phase of that, and I don't foresee that being something that will reverse.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see once things do go back to normal eventually, how much of this just stays with us.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in digital and mobile? Like now, do you guys, or are you kind of looking at it as just more holistically?
We're looking, I mean, because everything is on the phone. If we have, if there's a plan on a mobile device, it's not going to, it won't break through. And so we look at that holistically. I think if mobile is not a part of it, we don't consider it.
Mhm. Okay, here's another question from the audience. How are you, well, we kind of covered some of this. How are you managing and navigating your business, your customer strategies and employee engagement, particularly over the last few months? I don't know if there was anything, one angle in this question that was like a little bit newer was that you mentioned the customer strategies. How are you getting people like in the dealership now?
Yeah, and that's been something that we actually have been working on with the marketing subcommittee as well. The push to online and to e-commerce has been huge. That's been a major shift. It would obviously online retail is not a new phenomenon, but it was in the automotive space. And I think as dealerships were not able to stay open, they were able to do online retailing, eventually. And that became the catalyst for really e-commerce in the automotive space. So we had an e-commerce plan and strategy in place and initiatives. And what happened in kind of the March, April timeframe is all of that got accelerated. And so there are initiatives that were probably 6 months out or a year out got pushed up to 2 weeks. And so that was how quickly it was happening. And, I think I've been in automotive my whole career. I'm a huge, online retail person, and I'm so excited by this shift because this is where the consumer trends are going. And now we're building the foundation to deliver on that. I think that there will be people that will still want to go to dealerships, and that's, and that possibility is there. But now this is creating another path for consumers that want to shop digitally. And I think it's really starting to let consumers decide where they want to engage in automotive. And that to me is super exciting.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to think about how, we're so used to kind of buying clothes online and returning what we don't want and then adjusting to this idea of doing the same thing with a car. I mean, what happens if you got the car delivered and you looked at it and you're like, the way that the interior color and the exterior color wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I mean, I'm assuming we're going to adapt, exchange the car for maybe a different color, something like that, right?
Yeah, and I think we haven't had those particular situations. I think, in the course of, because it's such a considered purchase, there's a lot of ways that you can show things like that. That's not to say it won't ever happen, but I think there is a little bit of flexibility. And if it's the first time you're seeing something, what does taking delivery look like? And is there kind of a first check of it before you actually take delivery?
Yeah, I mean, I have not purchased a car online like that yet, even though I've always done a lot of research, but I'm just thinking all of the ways that retailers have changed. Like, for example, back to my jewelry retailer, jewelry retailers now very easily will send you sizers, like ring sizers.
Yes.
So, I could see a car sending you the little chips of this is what the paint, like, let me mail you what the paint looks like. So you can, and what the interiors look like. So you can really, really see, and all of us kind of adjusting to that reality. So that was all with the questions that we had. I do have one last thing. Like, what is your hope for the next, here we are, we're almost at Q4. I can't even believe it. 2021 is, here. What is like your hope for the future for us right now? Ending on an optimistic note.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is I hope that the declines in deaths, and I hope the health and safety, I hope that starts to improve. So there's that piece of it. I hope that we are able to come out of this in a recovery relatively quickly so we can stabilize the economy, stabilize some of the behaviors. And then I think more than anything, I think the positive things that we have learned from this, how do we apply that into whatever the next view of the world is going to look like? And I hope that we take some of that spending time with our families, nesting in some cases if you need to do that, and taking that moving forward. But I hope that we take these learnings with us in a positive way. And maybe in 10 years from now, be looking about like, remember when we all wore masks? Do you remember that? And it doesn't give you anxiety. I hope for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like my 6-year-old son will look back. It's like the best time ever because like mommy's always home. Mommy's taking him to soccer. Thank you both. Gabrielle, if ad sales doesn't work out, maybe you could be the next host on The View. Very good moderating skill. And Allyson, the fact that you take time to mentor, so many people and also are doing things like beast mode scenario planning is incredible. So I'm sure that your mentees are grateful. Thank you guys both. I'm now going to start to welcome the next panel. So good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So for our last session, we're joined by